When I first mentioned discussed with Phyllis the possibility of doing a talk this morning on the Tucson artifacts, I suggested this name, the SilverBell Caper, presenting it sort of in the light of how I was thinking it then as a mystery story. And it does have some mystery story type features to it. We're going to be looking at all kinds of contradictory evidence, a cast of suspects that Tony Hillerman would have been proud to have invented. And for those of you who like to start a mystery story by turning to the last page to see who really did it, I have to warn you, I don't have a solution. On Saturday, September the 13th, 1924, at Tucson, Arizona, something very strange happened. To this day, 65 years later, people are still arguing about exactly what it was that happened, and still more what it means. If, as I go on with the story, it sounds simple or even silly to you, please do keep in mind that lives have been ruined, people's health has been ruined, people's reputations have been ruined, and many people's life savings have been lost because of what happened to these people in Arizona. To this day, the people who were closely involved with the story and their descendants are divided into probably half a dozen warring factions that don't speak to each other. If any faction has reason to believe that you are friendly with another faction, they won't speak to you. There's a tremendous amount of animosity and hostility that's built up. No one has been closely involved with the story and come away unscathed. It all started innocently enough with a family expedition, a family outing in 1924. Charles Manier was a veteran of World War I. He was from Cleveland, Ohio. He was injured in action during the war, and to protect what remained of his health, his physician urged him to move to the desert Southwest. So in 1920, Manier did move down to Tucson, Arizona, where 4 years later we find him on this family outing. In the car, Charles Manier driving, in the car with him were his wife Bessie, their daughter Ethel, and Manier's father J.E. Manier from California, who was in Tucson visiting his son's family. The group went up to Picture Rocks, which is about, I guess, 15 miles or so northwest of Tucson, which is a rock outcropping with some Indian petroglyphs on it. And they were headed back into town on SilverBell Road, which would have taken them into downtown Tucson and back home again, when something happened to delay them. And to explain the delay, I have to tell you something about the geology of the area. Out in the desert, the immediate subsoil is a very dense, rocky hardpan called caliche. It's very hard. At the time, the best way of dealing with it, if you had to sink a large fence post or utility pole, was to use a pick to put a small hole in the caliche, and then use dynamite to enlarge it to the size you wanted. It's that kind of hard. When this caliche is broken up, it can be burned in a lime kiln to produce plaster or mortar that was useful for building. And there were a number, I believe it was 5 lime kilns that had been built out along SilverBell Road to exploit this, to burn the caliche down for use as building material. One of them had been operated in the 19th century by a man named Steinfeld. He later sold it in the mid-1880s to a Mexican mining executive, mining engineer named Vicente Adobe. Vicente Adobe had had to leave Mexico because he had made political enemies there and he was afraid for his life. He, his wife, and their son Timoteo moved up across the border and bought the lime kiln from Steinfeld. Since the Adobe family didn't know any Spanish, and the Adobe family didn't know any English, Steinfeld didn't know any Spanish, a Tucson area Mexican friend of the Adobes named Leandro Ruiz acted as an interpreter. The Adobe family operated the lime kiln for some time. In about 1893 or 94, Vicente, the father, died. His widow and their son Timoteo did something very unusual at this point. They left town very quickly. They packed their belongings, said goodbye to a few close friends, and left. They didn't even bother to sell the lime kiln. They just abandoned it. During the period when the Adobes had been operating the lime kiln, it's recorded that it was one of the popular recreations for the better class, better educated Mexicans in the area on a Friday night to go out to the lime kiln and visit the adobes, because they were a very articulate, well-educated family, especially the son Timoteo, who was remembered as being brilliant, very well read, interested in ancient cultures, having a great sense of humor. Apparently, many people in the Tucson Mexican community were very unhappy that the family left town so suddenly. Anyway, they did leave town. They abandoned the lime kiln. And some 30 years later, in 1924, on their way home from Picture Rocks, the Manier family drove past it. And J.E. Manier, Charles Manier's father, expressed an interest in the ruins of the old lime kiln, asked to stop. So his son pulled the car off to the side of the road. The family got out and strolled off into the desert about 50 feet to where the lime kiln was. While they were examining it, there was a little cutting that had been made in the bank where the lime kiln was built to allow wagons to be pulled up for loading and unloading the lime kiln. One of the two men, it's not clear which, had a walking stick with him, and he idly swung at a little, what he thought was a little rock sticking out of the bank. And he reported that it didn't sound or feel to him like a rock when he hit it. Charles Manier was interested. He went back to his car where he had a trenching shovel, and he came back, and with some effort they dug the thing out, and it turned out to be a large metal cross weighing about something in excess of 60 pounds. They took it home with them, and while they were cleaning it up, one of their neighbors who was standing by noticed a seam running around it, and they discovered that it was in fact two pieces of metal face to face that were held together with rivets at the end of each of the four arms. They broke it open and found that inside where the two pieces were put together there was a protective layer of wax, and that the two faces that were revealed by opening the cross up were covered with writing, which looked to them like Spanish. But by this time another neighbor, who was a professor at the University of Arizona nearby, had stopped in to see what the excitement was about. He was able to identify the writing as Latin, although he wasn't able to read it very well. They then, still on this same Saturday, they must have gotten off to a very early start in the morning, on this same Saturday they took it around to Frank Fowler, who was another professor at the university and one of the big names in classical scholarship at the time, who found some very interesting, it was a very interesting text that seemed to tell some story about Jews living somewhere, becoming involved in warfare. Manier was interested in the thing. He couldn't think what to do with it. He went to see a friend of his named Thomas Bent, who was another veteran of World War I. He was living in Tucson. He was working for the Veterans Administration as what we today would probably call a counselor for disabled veterans. Thomas Bent is a fascinating character. He was a very brilliant mind. He never graduated from high school, but he was able to pass his bar exams both for Arizona and California, and was admitted to the bar in both states. His initial recommendation to Manier was to sell the cross for scrap metal. The practice in those days with the Mexican community was that if anyone met a sudden, unexpected, and especially violent death, they weren't buried in the cemetery, they were just buried wherever they fell with a crude marker of some sort. And Bent speculated that this was one of those markers. But it seemed a little bit elaborate. It didn't seem very likely that a Mexican who would probably, in those days, have been marginally literate in Spanish would have been writing very nice Latin. They went back out to the site and to look for more pieces, and to make a very long story short, they found quite a few more pieces. In the end, after about 6 years had gone by, there were something more than 30 objects found out there. All but one, like the original cross, were made of lead. One was a draft version of the first cross, which was just carved on the slab of the caliche. Then there was a metal draft of the same cross. None of the others had draft versions. The objects themselves comprised a number of crosses, some swords, spear points, crossbow shaft, one strange object which nobody has ever quite explained. It's a paddle or fan-shaped thing with a long handle on it. It's sometimes called the lavarum. I prefer to call it a fan-shaped doodad, given a more proper technical name. Many of the pieces, including, well, mainly the crosses, were inscribed, some of them very heavily, with writing in mostly Latin, but some Hebrew, written apparently by either 2 or 3 people, simply by scratching on the lead. The 2 or 3 people involved seem to have shared a stylistic trait in their writing of using lots of very flowery rhetorical language to say very little. It's hard to put the story together, even though there's a huge volume of writing, it's hard to put the story together clearly without a lot of reading between the lines. But what you come up with is approximately this. The story of the crosses is, in the year 775 AD, a group of European Jews left Italy, apparently fleeing persecution, although that's not quite clear. They were blown across a vast ocean and landed on a huge unknown land, which they called Kalalis. They and their descendants wandered around Kalalis for some time, finally establishing a town at a place which they called Rhoda, which was apparently very near the site where the artifacts were found, which is to say just a little bit northwest of present-day Tucson. They were engaged in more or less sporadic warfare with the Native Americans in the area, which at the time would have been the Hohokam culture. Periods of peace intermingled with periods of warfare. Finally, late in the 9th century AD, they became involved in more or less final war, and they made, according to, as best we can tell from the inscriptions on the objects, they made this series of things to commemorate the fact that they had been there, and especially to commemorate some of their leaders. A lot of the crosses are marked in memoriam, and there's a form that appears over and over again of name plus the word laudatur. He is praised. And so we have Benjaminus laudatur, Benjamin is praised, Isaacus laudatur, Isaac is praised, Josephus laudatur, Joseph is praised, and so on. As more of these things started to turn up, interest in them also increased. Let me just name a couple of people. J.C. Sorrell was a retired geologist from the University of Arizona. He came out and looked at the things, decided that the objects were so firmly embedded in, surrounded by, and in some cases encrusted with caliche, that there was no way that they could possibly have been planted. It would have been impossible to get them in there because caliche is so slow to form. A teacher in the Tucson public schools named Laura Ostrander also became interested in the history of the colony, and she and Sorrell wound up as something of a writing team, writing articles and going around giving lectures on the artifacts and the history of the Roman colony that they told. Byron Cummings was the head, in fact he was the founder of the Department of Archaeology at the University of Arizona. He came out and became an enthusiastic champion of the authenticity of the artifacts. And he gradually drew the University of Arizona more and more into the project. In fact, he went so far as to sign a contract with Bent and Manier that the university would pay them $16,000 for the total collection. And this in pre-Depression money was quite a bit. For the entire collection, if they were proved to be genuine, not a hoax. Another person that I just want to name in passing was Neil Judd. Neil Judd was probably the name in the 1920s in southwestern archaeology. He was a young man. He was employed at the time by the Smithsonian, and he was the director of their excavations at the Chaco Canyon on Anasazi site in New Mexico. He came out one day. There are very nice pictures of him arriving at the site in his suit with necktie done up, vest and everything. They had, the excavators a day or two before had found 2 more pieces and had cleared them away just enough to see where they were, and then left them untouched for Judd to excavate. He started digging at the caliche, had to take his coat off, had to take his vest off, wound up having to roll his sleeves up, And finally, after about an hour with sweat pouring off of him, he had gotten one of the pieces out. And he gave it as his opinion that, yes, nobody could conceivably have planted these things that tight in the caliche. He later got back to his office and, of course, changed his mind and said, well, obviously it's a hoax. They must have been planted. This is something that you find very often, especially with these artifacts. I don't have any idea how many establishment archaeologists came out, looked, hacked away at the caliche, said, yes, this has not been tampered with, these things have been here centuries. Went back to the office and said, well, of course, it's a hoax. They couldn't face the implications of the 9th century Jewish colony. There were a lot of people who thought it was a hoax, and the pieces themselves gave two very good reasons for being suspicious of a hoax. On the swords, there were about 7 or 8 swords altogether. They were all identical in design and ornamentation except for one. The one had all the usual features, but in addition, on the blade, someone had sketched, by scratching in, a very nice picture of a dinosaur. Specifically, the dinosaur that most of us call Brontosaurus. Dinosaur that we think of when people use the word dinosaur. Great big body, long neck, little tiny head, long tapering tail. Now, bones of that dinosaur, of course, have been around for a long time, but nobody had ever put them together to see what it looked like until 1900, when Andrew Carnegie gave a grant to some scientists from MIT. And they went away and labored at it for a few years, and finally, with much song and dance, in 1905, they published their drawings and models of the dinosaur. So prior to 1905, no human being had ever seen one of these dinosaurs before. But here it is on sword number 12. The other problem that people had that caused them to suspect a hoax was it was the practice of Latin textbooks in the day to use exempla, or examples, when the writer would explain some point of Latin grammar or Latin syntax, and then put in a couple of quotations from the classic authors showing how native speakers of Latin had used this technique. And it was found in a number of places that, especially the Harkness Latin Grammar of 1881, you could open it up, and on a particular page spread there would be 2 or 3 exempla. And then you could go to one of the crosses and find the exact same 2 or 3 sentences, one right after the other, in the same order. This happened in quite a few places. Harkness, in some cases, would make slight modifications in the classical quotations. He might move it from the passive to the active voice, and whenever he did, the cross followed Harkness usage in 1881, not the original classical author. And probably, apart from the dinosaur, the ultimate smoking gun was one quotation from Cicero, which included the phrase "Hoc odive de patre meo." I heard this from my father. This sentence hadn't been used by Harkness prior to the 1881 edition. In 1881, Harkness put it in, but unfortunately, in setting the type, there was a misprint made. And instead of de patre meo, it became de parente meo. Instead of, I heard this from my father, I heard this from my parent. Since patre and parente look and sound a lot alike and mean very similar things, in context, the sentence means the same thing either way. The mistake wasn't caught, and it went into print with the wrong word until it was caught, of course, the day after it went to press. So subsequent editions fixed it. But the 1881 edition of Harkness, and only the 1881 edition, had the misprint, de parente meo. Sure enough, that sentence appears on one of the crosses, and sure enough, it says parente, not patre. Not only do the same sentences appear in the same order, they even appear with the same typographical error. Byron Cummings of the University of Arizona was blowing more and more hot and cold on the authenticity of the things, especially since money was at stake, and we know now, although Bent and Manuel didn't know it at the time, that Cummings was under tremendous political pressure from the university hierarchy to find some way of getting out of the contract. The only escape clause in the contract was that the university didn't have to buy the objects if they were shown to be a hoax. The determination of whether or not they were to be a hoax was left to Byron Cummings. As the only way possible to get out of buying the artifacts, Cummings eventually said, well, they're a hoax. Apparently, to the day that he died, Cummings alternately blew hot and cold. There were times when he seemed to believe in them as authentic, and there were times when he just dismissed them as so much rubbish. He seems to have been very confused about them himself. I have gone, as others have, back to his notes. All of his field records, all of his photographs still survive. They're divided between the Arizona Historical Society and the Arizona State Museum. And I have gone over every scrap of paper, every index card for the years in question, 1924 to 1930, and there is not one word of mention of the SilverBell Road artifacts. The only speculation that we have come to, and I'm not the only one who has come to this, is that Cummings very carefully kept those records separate from the others, intending that after his retirement he was going to write a book or otherwise deal with them separately from everything else he'd ever done in his career. And in that case, the notes were almost certainly lost in a house fire at his home in Tucson in the 1950s. At any event, none of his notes, as far as we can tell, have survived. The university did say that the artifacts were fakes, which probably in the end was the best thing that could have happened, because if they had taken the artifacts, they almost certainly wouldn't have taken care of them. They would have stuffed them in a box in the basement and might very well have thrown them out in a fit of housekeeping. As it is, Thomas Bent took the artifacts back and left in a huff, and he kept them till he died in 1972, very jealously guarding them. And by his will, they were left to the present owner, who is, if possible, even more jealous of guarding them. So they've probably been much better protected by being described as hoaxes than they ever would have been if they'd been called authentic. Can we take a quick break and look at some slides?
Is it true they're in a San Francisco bank vault now?
They are in a bank vault out west. They are not in Tucson, and because of assurances that I have given indirectly to the present owner, I don't even want to identify what part of the west.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Sorry.
The present owner is very, very concerned about his privacy. He is not interested in the objects themselves, curiously, and his greatest wish is to be left alone.
Is there any speculation as to why they're walking crosses?
Lots of speculation. As far as I know, nobody has ever come up with any suggestions. This is SilverBell Road today. The artifact, we're right near, but not quite at the artifact site. You can see a few people built houses out there since. This, unfortunately, very underexposed, but this gives you some idea of the terrain. It's sort of hilly, gravelly country with lots of scrub vegetation. A little bit east of the artifact site, this is a stream that runs through here in the front. It's a tributary to the Santa Cruz River. I'm going to mention the stream again in a few minutes. This is the highest that I've ever seen it. I took this about 2 months ago, middle of last September, at the end of the longest and wettest summer rainy season that anyone in Tucson had ever remembered. There's usually just barely water flowing in it. The Santa Cruz proper is back here, this dry valley in the distance. These mountains are the western flank of the Santa Catalinas, north of Tucson. Tucson itself is off the picture to the right. That is one of the photos from the original 1920s excavations. You can see the dense, compact caliche that's developed. In the original print, and this is a slide taken off a print made off a print, but in the original, right about here, you can see a little piece of metal sticking out. It's one of the artifacts in situ. The man on the right is Byron Cummings of the University of Arizona. I'm showing you this one mainly just for the caliche itself, and also because back here where the bank hasn't been excavated yet, you see there's a lot of this desert shrub vegetation. My limited experience, I would really like to hear Dr. Greenwell's opinion of this, because I know he's worked with arid land vegetation. My impression, from my limited experience looking at bulldozed sites in Arizona that have then been allowed to go wild again, is that this is probably at least 20 or 25 years growth of vegetation, which would sort of present one more complication for a hoaxer. Another picture from the 1920s at the excavation site. This white blob in the bottom is a reflection of a light. Up here, this is the sky, and this is the natural ground level back here, which gives you some idea of how deep some of the excavations got. Most of the objects were found 5 to 6 feet below current ground level. Again, you see the hard, compacted, and stratified caliche. The dapper gentleman in the foreground is John Bent, Tom Bent's brother. This is a motif that's very common on the objects. It's usually called the map, which is what I'm going to call it for no particular reason other than that there's not much else to call it. This particular version of it is from Artifact 13, which is the fan-shaped thing. You have this square that's divided up into triangles, rhombuses, smaller squares. Up here on the top you have a box labeled Romani, Romans. On the left, Britannia, Britain. Galla, Gauls. And down here at the bottom, Terra Calalis, or just Calalis. Most people have interpreted it as a map of the relative positions of where these things are, but that doesn't seem not very useful. I mean, even leaving out Calalis, Britain, Gaul, and Rome weren't anything like that orientation. And even if they were, it's hard to tell quite what this doodad in the middle has to do with anything. But it keeps appearing over and over. This is the most common motif on the things. And I'm just going to call it the map. These swords up here look vaguely like the swords that were found in the site. I have to, by way of credit, say I was not looking forward to drawing this thing for you. And then this summer I was visiting with my friend Donald Buchanan of Info and the Epigraphic Society, and he was able to reach into his file cabinet and pull out a tracing of it and say, here. So my thanks to Donald for the tracing. This is one of the earlier crosses. I think this is number 3. Gives you some idea of what they looked like when they were found. You just have this really rough exterior from where it was molded in a dirt mold. The upper surfaces, which were smooth by virtue of being exposed to air, is where the inscriptions were done. Typical cross, you probably can't really see the lettering from more than 10 feet away, but it's covered with a text, in this case in Latin. I think this is cross number 3. Yeah, this is 3. But anyway, you have the cross covered with Latin, holes in each of the 4 arms, at the end of the arms, that are used to put lead rivets in to hold the 2 pieces together face to face. It's buried.
Oh, Dale, what is it that the crosses said? What was the meaning behind, I mean, on the text of the crosses?
They tell the story of the Roman colony that left Europe in 775 and was finally killed off in about the year 900. The Roman Jewish colony.
What's the scale of the picture? And what is the overall length of the cross?
This cross, as I recall, this cross is about 1 foot in length, or a little bit over. They're fairly small. They're still heavy because they're made of lead. This is one of the faces of cross number 6. Crown, 3 faces labeled Judas, Benjaminus, and Isaac. The map here, very small, and then running down the side here, the letters In Memoriam.
Are you sure that's a map or is that a flag?
A what?
A flag.
I don't know what it is.
Well, I'm just wondering if it's a flag. You know, you may want to.
It might be.
I mean, it may not be a map. It may be just strictly the word a flag of a colony. It's just an idea.
It might. I don't know. I hadn't thought of that. Question was, could it be a flag? Yeah, could. That actually makes more sense to me than a map. This is the other side of the same cross. Not much to see here. The same arrangement of 4 holes for rivets in the end. Here's a picture of a temple on its side. And then down here, a crown also on its side. And then down at the bottom, Benjaminus Laudator, Benjamin is praised. Cross number 7, again a crown, Josephus, Saulus, and the words In Memoriam. I don't think I have another, I don't have the other side of that one. This is some of the swords, and fragments of swords from the side.
They've been, have they been authenticated for antiquity or?
There's very severe limits on how well you can date lead once it's been molded. If it were ferrous metal, you would have a chance. Although you would probably need more information than we have about exact circumstances in which they were found. All the swords have same ornamentation on them, a crown and two little wiggly lines that are taken to be stylized snakes. And then over here, the map or flag on the other side, and the letters LI bracketing it. This is sword number 12 with the dinosaur on the blade. It's running right along there. This picture and the other pictures so far have been from the 1920s. This is a more modern picture. It was taken about 1970 of sword number 12. You may be able to see the dinosaur. Here's the body, legs, neck, head, forked tongue, and tail. This was one of the David Evans photos from about 1970. It was taken for Cyclone Covey's book, Kalalis. And again, I have to give a double credit statement there to Donald Buchanan, once again, who was able to get me prints of the pictures, and to the copyright holder, Cyclone Covey, who incredibly graciously, and my head is still spinning from it, gave me permission to use them in any way I want. You can tell he's not a professional archaeologist, by the way. This is the fan-shaped doodad. Some people call it a lahar. Crown with the letter L, again the flag or map. Two swords, temple. This is one of the more complicated crosses. You have a cross down here with a snake wrapped around it. The snake is a separate piece of metal, separately molded and then wrapped on. Above that, you have a crescent moon, then this medallion, and then another knob sticking out the top. Up here, there's an angel blowing a trumpet, two more angels blowing trumpets, a dove rising, two angels with swords, just like the ones that were found. The crown with the letter L. Out here, there are two characters like something like interlocking V's, one point up, one point down. Many people have interpreted that, and with some justification, I think, as an early form of the Masonic square and compass logo.
How about the Templar, about the Templar sign and the temple on the left photo was also the temple like back there?
Yeah, there's a temple here too.
Yeah, that's an octagonal temple.
It appears to be.
Inside.
Uh-huh.
Okay, this would look like Gnostic use. What year was it? What year?
The self-given dates are 775 to 900 AD.
Oh, 900 AD. Gnostic use coming from southern France. There are temples in Spain.
One theory that I've never heard mentioned before, but I have subjected a number of these pictures to psychometrists to use dowsing or psychometry to get an age for the objects, and a large number of them came up with that they were Cathar artifacts from about the 13th century. Yeah.
General octagonal buildings are standard memorial church design used from around 300 on. They would often build churches of octagonal design on sacred sites, commemorating particularly martyr sites.
Also, the Cathars were, were probably heavily involved with the early Freemasons, which would help to explain the Masonic symbols. Also, the Cathars, the Knights Templar were accused of having been heavily involved in the Cathar heresy, and the two of the crosses from Tucson side have this snake wrapped around. I've never seen that symbol, a cross with a snake on it, anywhere else except two Knight Templar medallions that I've found pictures of, that have the exact same image, except that the snake is head down on the cross instead of head up.
Unless they're trying to imply medicine, just like we do today.
Maybe. I would be very scared of trying to speculate what anybody meant by these. The symbolism is so completely different from anything that I've ever seen anywhere else. The other side of this this topmost medallion here has the numbers 1 through 5 in Roman numerals down one side, 6 through 10 in Roman numerals down the other, apparently in reference to the 10 Commandments. And on the central medallion here, where the crown is on this side, there's a menorah or some French candlestick. This is my personal favorite, Cross 18, kind of an arrowhead thing at the top. This circle included in it makes it look almost like a Celtic cross. Again, we have the snake coming up and wrapped around. The map or flag is down here on this little pedal thing, the crown. I have the disadvantage of not knowing any Hebrew, so I'm always dependent on other people for Hebrew explanations. This inscription on the right arm I've had is interpreted to me as a good land or a fair land. Up here on the arrowhead is the Jewish word shalom for peace. And then out here on this arm, just so that the snake is looking at it, in Roman alphabet, the same letters we use is the name Kalalis. This is a detail of that same cross. You see the map or flag, the crown. This is the snake's tail coming down. It doesn't photograph very well, but the snake itself, if you do get a good enough picture of it, is obviously a rattlesnake. You can see the scale pattern and even the rattles on the tail. And a close-up of the snake's head, you see the scale pattern, and again the word Kalalis out here that it's looking at. And that's the end of the pictures. And I don't have very much time for what it means. Let me just summarize very, very quickly. The main problem with it as a hoax is that it's essentially impossible to do. The evidence for genuineness is essentially the caliche, which would take hundreds of years to develop, according to what best we know about caliche. Now, most people who take the hoax approach have said, well, caliche formation is a slow process mediated by water, so if you pour enough water on, it'll work, and you'll get your caliche. Which is true, but it only moves the problem, because the hoax, if it is a hoax, wasn't carried out here in a hotel room where you can go across the hall and have as much water as you want. It was carried out in the middle of the desert. There's no water there. The only conceivable source of water is that little stream that I showed you, which is half a mile away downhill and on the wrong side of SilverBell Road. There was no running water. In fact, to this day, if you were to build a house out at the artifact site and go to the Tucson Water Department and ask for a hookup, they would tell you nothing doing. The farthest north that the water lines run on SilverBell Road is to the intersection of the Camino del Cerro, about 2 miles south. So you would have to go to this stream, which means that you're going to have to pump the water out of the stream. And by the way, in those days, it's not there anymore, but in those days there was a dairy down there by the stream. And the dairy operators, a father and son team named Knapp, showed themselves during the excavation at the artifact site to be very interested in things going on next door to them, and very downright nosy, in fact. So you would have to figure out some way to get the water out of the stream without the Knapps noticing you. Then pump it about half a mile across country, lift it 30 feet or so in the process, and get it across SilverBell Road without anyone noticing. Because of course the moment that anyone sees you, the jig is up. But you could do it by pumping water out of the stream if you didn't mind using gasoline or hand-powered pumps, because electricity wasn't run out to this section of SilverBell Road until 1962. There are all kinds of, the people who favor the hoax theory have come up with all kinds of speculation about people who might have done it. And I don't have time to go into it, unfortunately, but I think I could blow any of them out of the water pretty effectively. Unfortunately, the dinosaur and the quotations also make it pretty likely that we are looking at a hoax. So we're faced with a hoax that seems to be absolutely impossible. In lieu of any of the theories that the archaeological establishment has come up with, let me just close very quickly by a theory of my own, which I am not at all happy with. And the fact that I bring it up about 20% seriously will give you some indication of how desperate I feel about the impossibility of getting any fix on these things. What we see is entirely consistent with objects that were made by a person or persons unknown in the 20th century or later, packed into a time machine, transported to the 9th century, and buried. I am gladly, desperately unhappy with that. I don't believe them for a moment, but I can't come up with a better one. Yeah.
I have a question. Is there any Indian artifacts that might have been dated around 700 AD? Dinosaurs?
There are lots. The Hohokam culture was very enthusiastic about pottery. and especially they were very enthusiastic about painted pottery, and especially about painted pottery with wildlife on it. Every kind of bird and animal that is found in the desert, there are thousands and thousands of pottery representations from the Hohokam culture, painted and in some cases statuettes, and no, there is not a single dinosaur. Incidentally, just in passing, if there was a Jewish colony, if these things are real, if there was a Jewish colony and it was located at or very near the artifact site, one of the largest Hohokam settlements in the entire Southwest was the Hodges site, as archaeologists know it, which was just about at its peak of population in the period that we're looking at, the 9th century, and it was only a mile away, just on the other side of the Santa Cruz River. So if this was the site of a Jewish colony, then the Jews and the Indians got up every morning and stared across the river at each other. They were right next door neighbors.
Yeah?
Yes.
What was the source of the lead? Were there lead mines in that area? Was that imported lead or what?
Was it ever analyzed?
Yes. It has been analyzed 4 times with, as you might expect from this thing, completely different results. 2 of the assays said, yes, it is natural lead ore. There are a number of lead mines with very rich ore within 5 miles or less of this site. 2 of the assays said, yes, this lead, its makeup, and the impurities in it, traces of silver, gold, arsenic, copper, what have you, are entirely consistent with one or another of the mines. In fact, they even suggest one of the assayers, Pellegrin and Sons of Tucson, which was then one of the biggest assay firms in the Southwest, even specified 2 particular mine sites that it might have come from. One assay was also done, which turned up with photomicrographs to prove the point that it was simply modern printer's type metal that had been melted down. Another assay, which was done here in Washington in 1926 with some of the earliest radiation testing technology. And I personally didn't know until a couple of months ago that any radiation technology was available in the 1920s, but apparently it was, and on the basis of the residual radioactivity of the lead, the tester found that it had been many hundreds of years since it was melted into its present form. I don't know how much reliability to give that test from that date, but yes, there have been at least 3 assays, one of which said unequivocally 20th century, the other 2 said unequivocally natural wild ore. Yeah.
Well, the dinosaur in the 7th century AD is pretty common. It's a big worm. They were all over Europe, the big worm. There were many places in England and all over Europe who were fighting the big worms all over that place at that time. Now, the style of this dinosaur is very modern. It's very beautifully made. You know, it looks like a real artist made this dinosaur. But in the 7th century and 8th century, a lot were talking about big dragons. Could it be a dragon?
Yeah, and there are. This is not the only dinosaur of its kind from the Southwest. There was a stone idol found at Granby, Colorado in, I think, the 19-teens with a dinosaur on one side and a mastodon on the other. Donald has done a lot of work with this one, I know, because it has also, it's a little man with a dinosaur on one side, a mastodon on the other, and on his stomach is a writing in a very archaic form of Chinese, which is still legible to this day. Yeah?
I remember from Simon Covey's book, he said something about checking it out with the local Indians, and they said, in effect, you white men are pretty bad, but you should see the batch we had to get rid of earlier. And did you do any checking with the local tribes and so on to verify that?
No, I have not. I would like to very much, but I haven't had an opportunity to as yet.
Yeah. Did I understand you right that the main problem you have is in terms of the transportation as a hoax thing, transportation of water to the site, and also how much water do you think would be needed to do that job?
The question is how much water are we really talking about? Part of the problem is that nobody to this date really knows much about the way caliche forms. based on what little is known, I've plugged in different numbers to different mathematical models, which I don't want to take time to go into now. And I come up with a low-end estimate of 100,000 tons of water that would have to be poured on the site to solidify the caliche. A high-end estimate of...
To solidify how much area of caliche do you
The
need?
bank is 78 by 78, approximately. Low-end estimate of 100,000 tons, high-end estimate of 2 million tons. I think probably in the neighborhood of 200,000 tons of water. And given the impracticality of pumping it, this means that every last drop of that has to be carried in by hand and poured on the bank.
A kind of small section be done and then just reintroduced?
You're getting into, for simplicity and time's sake, I was going into the what I would consider previously completed hoax. That is, all the pieces are made, buried, and the site is left. There's a fair amount of evidence that if it's a hoax, it was done progressively, that is, planting one piece at a time just ahead of the excavators. There's a lot of attractiveness to that theory, but there's two problems with it. One being that if the hoax is done progressively, assuming it to be a hoax, if it's all previously completed, the hoaxer has 10 years of time frame to work in, from the time that the last textbook was published, that he quoted from, if he was quoting, to the time that the first piece was found. He's got 10 years to work. If it's a progressive hoax, he's got to be able to do his job in a matter of hours. Even though each segment of the job is much smaller, he's still got to be able to do the work very fast, reset the caliche in such a way that he won't leave any wet spots behind, even deep in the bank. And in some cases, they would have to cut away upwards of a foot of the bank before they got to the thing, which would then extend a foot or so into it. So that you would have to go more than 2 feet into the bank, get lots of water in there, 6 feet underground to reset the caliche, and then not have it damp the next day when the excavators came along, because if they found any damp caliche and it hadn't rained for 3 or 4 months, they would know immediately that the site had been tampered with. And no tampering was ever found. No one ever found any evidence of tampering at the site. Now, the second problem is, even with previously completed hoax, there was a family named Nurse living just up the road. There was a Sunset Dairy half a mile away. SilverBell Road is only 50 feet away from the site. The hoaxer has to survive scrutiny. He's on public display. If it's a progressive hoax, then he has to survive not only public scrutiny, but intense and hostile scrutiny, because by 1927, the University of Arizona has taken over. They have moved their excavating team to the site. They are actually living right at the excavation site. The project is under the direction of Byron Cummings, who is under intense pressure not to buy the objects, to find any excuse at all for not buying them. The immediate manager on site was a graduate student of his, Emil Howery, who by this time was intensely skeptical and very intensely hostile.
And my former professor.
Yes, probably so. He's still very active. And Howery has posted 24-hour guards on the site just to prevent tampering. And the pieces keep right on turning up. Point was made in the latest Info Journal, and you're going to have to refresh me on names, because I'm drawing a blank on the author's name. The author makes an observation to the effect of the stage magician may be able to do anything, but can he really do the same trick over and over under controlled conditions? The author, the writer of the article, was talking about Uri Geller, I believe, but it applies here as well, because if this is a progressive hoax with pieces being planted as he goes, he has to repeat the exact same trick over and over 30 times in front of a skeptical and even, in the end, aggressively hostile audience, and nobody ever sees him. So it's a very impressive hoax if he's doing it that way. All the way back.
Two things. I was wondering, is there any other evidence in the past of Jewish colonies or groups using cross smudge as a symbol? And the other thing, you know, other artifacts, like there's some figurines down in Mexico, the Acambaro figurines, that are supposed to be really mysterious, and all kinds of men, dinosaur, and odd animals. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I'm not familiar with those particular Mexican things, but there are lots of very strange things out west.
Do you know where some of those are, like, besides the Kalalas book, where some of those are written about or listed, or where we can find out?
Not offhand, no, I don't know. And on the question of the cross, I have been told, I unfortunately know practically nothing about Judaism, and I would not have thought that the cross would be used as a symbol. I have had people tell me that at a very early stage, perhaps 1,000 years or so BC, that some Jewish sects did use the cross as a symbol. I don't know that for a fact. Frankly, the snake puzzles me more.
Can I just add a tiny little thing? I don't know, but now in introductory courses at the University of Arizona, it's often stated, and just to show how stories change over time and rumors and so on, professors often state these Roman crosses which are presented to try and prove that there was a Roman legion that came all the way to Arizona, and of course that's nonsense. And that's what students often hear today. The Roman legion.
Well, thank you, Dale. By the way, this is by no means come to an end. Dale's going to be around here the rest of the afternoon. And those of you who would like to pursue this and aren't coming with us on the bus tour, Dale's willing and able to talk to you. I think you told me the next firm thing on your schedule is going to work tomorrow morning, right?
Just about, yeah.
Terrific.